Naomi Carter had always been ambitious. She knew that to rise above the expectations set for her, as a young black woman in the world of finance, she needed to work harder and smarter than anyone else. At Kingsley Enterprises, one of the largest financial firms in the country, Naomi had built a promising career. But her achievements were overshadowed by a secret she had never meant to keep, a secret that was about to change her life. Michael Kingsley, the CEO of Kingsley Enterprises, was everything she had once admired. He was charismatic, sharp, and confident. And from the moment Naomi was promoted to work closer with him, a spark had formed between them. It started innocently enough, late nights in the office, small talk that turned into long conversations, and glances that lingered too long. Naomi didn't intend to fall for him, but Michael's attention made her feel seen, appreciated in a way that her colleagues often overlooked. But Michael was married, and Naomi knew better than to let herself get carried away. Yet when the affair began, Naomi let herself believe it was something real. Michael's whispered promises and stolen moments in his office felt too intense to be anything less than genuine. But now, as she sat in his office, her heart pounding in her chest, the truth was unraveling before her eyes. "I'm pregnant, Michael." The words hung in the air between them, suffocating the space. Michael, who had been reviewing a stack of documents, froze. He didn't look up immediately, but Naomi could see the tension in his body. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, emotionless. "I see." Naomi stared at him in disbelief. That was it? That was his response? After everything they had shared, after all the emotions and vulnerability she had exposed, that was all he had to say? "It's yours," she continued, her voice trembling. "I thought you should know." Michael sighed, finally leaning back in his chair. His face was unreadable, the mask of a man who had perfected the art of detachment. "Naomi," he began, "this is unfortunate." Her voice cracked with a mix of anger and disbelief. She had expected shock, maybe even concern, but not this indifference. "You should have been more careful," Michael said, his tone sharper now. Naomi's stomach twisted in knots. She had never seen him like this, so cold, so dismissive. "We were careful," she whispered, her hands trembling in her lap. "Clearly not careful enough," he replied, his words cutting her deeper than any knife could. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. "Naomi, I can't be involved in this. You understand that, don't you?" Naomi shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "What are you saying? You're just going to walk away?" "I have to," he said simply, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. "I have a family, a reputation. This can't be part of my life." Naomi's heart shattered. Everything she had built with him, all the trust and the connections she had thought was real, was nothing more than an illusion. She had been a fool to believe that he would stand by her. "I'm keeping the baby," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Michael's expression didn't change. "You do what you need to do, Naomi." But this conversation never happened. He paused, his eyes hardening. "And as of today, you're no longer an employee at Kingsley Enterprises. I've spoken to HR. You'll receive a severance package, but after today, you're done here." Naomi felt the world collapse around her. "You're firing me?" "I'm protecting my family," Michael said, his voice cold and final. "And you should do the same." Naomi stood, her legs unsteady, her mind racing. She couldn't believe what was happening. "I never thought you'd do this," she said, tears streaming down her face. Michael didn't flinch. "You should have never thought otherwise." Without another word, Naomi walked out of the office, her heart broken, her future uncertain. The days that followed Naomi's dismissal were the hardest she had ever faced. She had dedicated years to building her career at Kingsley Enterprises, and in one fell swoop, it had been taken from her. With no income and a baby on the way, Naomi was thrust into a world of uncertainty. She tried to find work, applying to other firms, but every door was slammed shut. Michael had ensured she wouldn't be hired anywhere in the industry. She was blacklisted, her reputation tarnished before she could even defend herself. Naomi's savings dwindled quickly, And soon she found herself selling her apartment and moving into a small, modest home in a less affluent part of the city. Every day was a struggle, and the weight of her growing child in her womb was a constant reminder of the life she had lost. But she refused to give up. She was determined to survive for the sake of her unborn child. By the time her son, Jaden Carter, was born, Naomi had adjusted to her new life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. Jaden became the light of her life, and every decision she made from then on was for him. Naomi never spoke of Michael to Jaden. She didn't want her son to grow up with the pain and betrayal that had defined her past. Instead, she focused on giving him the best life she could, working multiple jobs to provide for him and ensure that he had opportunities she never had. Jaden grew up curious, intelligent, and ambitious, just like his mother. He excelled in school, and by the time he graduated from university, he was ready to make his mark on the world. He didn't know the truth about his father, and Naomi hoped he never would. But fate had a different plan. This is the beginning of the story. It introduces the main characters, sets the emotional stakes, and establishes the betrayal that will drive the narrative. Let me know how you feel about the tone, the pacing, or any other aspects before I continue with the rest of the chapters. At 26 years old, Jaden Carter was ready to take on the world. He had worked hard through college, earning a degree in finance, just like his mother always encouraged him to do. He had dreams of making it big, of creating a future where his mother wouldn't have to work two jobs just to make ends meet. Naomi's sacrifices weren't lost on him. He knew she had given up so much for him to have a shot at success. Jaden applied to all the top financial firms in the city, confident that his grades, internships, and dedication would land him a spot at one of the best companies. His mother had always told him that he could achieve anything if he worked hard enough, and he had taken that lesson to heart. When Kingsley Enterprises offered him a position as a junior financial analyst, he could hardly believe his luck. The firm was a giant in the industry, known for its influence and power. It was exactly the kind of place Jaden had dreamed of working, a stepping stone to a future filled with success. He could already imagine the pride in his mother's eyes when he told her the news. But when he shared the offer with Naomi, her reaction wasn't what he expected. "I got the job, Mom," Jaden beamed, holding up the acceptance letter from Kingsley Enterprises. "This is huge. I can finally start paying you back for everything you've done." Naomi's hands froze in the middle of folding laundry, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the letter. She felt the blood drain from her face as memories of Michael Kingsley and the nightmare that had followed came flooding back. "Kingsley Enterprises?" she whispered, barely able to mask the dread in her voice. "Can you believe it? I'm starting next month." Jaden didn't notice the tension that gripped his mother, still riding high on his achievement. "This is the break I've been waiting for." Naomi stared at him, her mind racing. How could this be happening? Of all the companies, why did it have to be Kingsley's? She had worked so hard to protect Jaden from that part of her life, from the man who had abandoned them both. And now, unknowingly, Jaden was walking right into the lion's den. "I don't know, Jaden. Are you sure this is the right place for you?" Naomi's voice was tight, her hands trembling as she set the laundry down. Jaden furrowed his brow, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. "What do you mean, Mom? It's one of the top financial firms in the country. This could set me up for life." Naomi couldn't argue with that. She knew how much Jaden wanted this, how hard he had worked for the opportunity. But she also knew the truth about Michael Kingsley, and it terrified her to think of what might happen if Jaden found out the full story. "I just want you to be careful, that's all," Naomi said, her voice softening as she tried to hide her fear. "Sometimes these big companies aren't what they seem." Jaden smiled, thinking his mother was simply nervous about him stepping into such a high-stakes environment. "I'll be careful, I promise. But you don't have to worry about me, Mom. I've got this." Naomi forced a smile, but inside her heart ached. She didn't know how to tell Jaden the truth without destroying everything he believed about his father, about the world. For now, she would keep quiet, praying that the past would stay buried. The morning of Jaden's first day at Kingsley Enterprises was filled with excitement and anticipation. He had dressed in his best suit, a gift from Naomi for his graduation. And as he stood in front of the towering glass building, he couldn't help but feel a rush of pride. This was the beginning of something big, the start of his career at one of the most prestigious firms in the industry. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Employees moved quickly between meetings, the hum of business filling the air. Jaden was impressed by the sleek, high-tech environment, everything from the glass-walled conference rooms to the cutting-edge workstations. It was a place where success was not only expected, but demanded. He was led through the building by Alice Murray, his supervisor, a no-nonsense woman in her early 40s who wasted no time in laying out what was expected of him. "Kingsley doesn't hire just anyone," Alice said as they walked through the halls. "You've got talent, but talent only gets you so far here. We expect results. Can you handle that?" "Absolutely," Jaden replied, determined to prove himself. Alice gave him a curt nod before handing him a folder filled with documents. "Good. Here's your first assignment. I'll expect your analysis by the end of the day." Jaden took the folder, his heart racing with excitement. This was exactly what he had wanted. Chance to prove himself, to make a name in the industry. As he settled into his new workspace, Jaden glanced around the office, trying to take in everything at once. It was then that he noticed a group of senior executives gathered near the corner office, talking quietly among themselves. Jaden's eyes were drawn to the man in the center of the group, a tall, imposing figure with sharp features and an air of authority that commanded attention. Jaden felt a strange sensation wash over him as he watched Kingsley speak with his executives. There was something oddly familiar about the man, though Jaden couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, with a quiet confidence that made him seem larger than life. Or maybe it was just the realization that this was the man who had built the company Jaden now worked for, a man whose success Jaden had long admired from afar. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Jaden felt a flicker of recognition pass between them. But just as quickly, Kingsley turned away, continuing his conversation without a second thought. Jaden shook off the strange feeling, focusing instead on the work in front of him. He was here to succeed, to build a future that he and his mother could be proud of. Whatever strange connection he thought he felt with Michael Kingsley was probably just his nerves playing tricks on him. After all, this was his first day at one of the biggest companies in the city. It was natural to feel a little overwhelmed. Little did he know, the past he had long been kept from was about to catch up with him in ways he could never have imagined. The weeks that followed Jaden's first day at Kingsley Enterprises were a blur of hard work and long hours. He dove headfirst into his assignments, eager to make a name for himself. His natural talent for finance didn't go unnoticed. He quickly became one of the top junior analysts in his department. His supervisors praised his work, and even Michael Kingsley himself had started to take a personal interest in Jaden's progress. But there was an undercurrent of discomfort that Jaden couldn't shake. Every time Michael Kingsley came around, Jaden felt an inexplicable tension in the air. He chalked it up to the usual nerves of being around someone so powerful, but the strange flicker of recognition he'd felt on that first day never completely left him. Even more unsettling was Naomi's behavior. Every time Jaden brought up work, especially his encounters with Kingsley, she grew distant, her usual warmth replaced by something colder, more anxious. Jaden could see it in her eyes. The way her hands would tremble slightly when she folded laundry, or the way her gaze would drift when he talked about the firm. One evening, after another long day at the office, Jaden came home to find Naomi sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly around a mug of tea. The television was on, but she wasn't watching it, her eyes unfocused as she stared down at the steam rising from her cup. "Mom?" Jaden asked as he hung his coat on the hook by the door. "You okay?" Naomi looked up quickly, her expression softening when she saw him. "Oh, Jaden, I didn't hear you come in." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Jaden sat down across from her, studying her face. "You've been acting weird lately," he said gently. "Ever since I started at Kingsley." Is something bothering you? Naomi's hands tightened around her mug, and for a moment Jaden thought she was going to tell him something. But then she shook her head and smiled again, this time more convincingly. I'm just tired, sweetheart. It's nothing. I've been working long hours, that's all. Jaden didn't press her. He knew his mother was proud of him, and he didn't want to stress her out even more. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something more than just long hours or fatigue. A few months later, Jaden was called into Michael Kingsley's office for a one-on-one meeting. It was rare for junior analysts to get FaceTime with the CEO, so Jaden was both excited and nervous about the opportunity. As he stood in the elevator, heading up to the executive floor, his thoughts raced. What could Kingsley want from him? The office was as intimidating as ever, with its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Michael Kingsley sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking as powerful and untouchable as ever. But as Jaden stepped inside, he couldn't help but notice the slight tension in Kingsley's posture, the way his eyes lingered on Jaden just a little too long. Jaden, Kingsley said, his voice smooth but controlled. Have a seat. Jaden sat down, his heart racing. Thank you, sir. I wasn't expecting this. Kingsley leaned back in his chair, studying Jaden closely. I've been watching your work. You've done well. Better than most people your age in this business. Jaden smiled, feeling a surge of pride. I appreciate that, sir. I've been trying to prove myself. Kingsley nodded slowly, but there was something off in his expression, something that made Jaden's stomach twist with unease. For a moment, Kingsley didn't speak, just stared at Jaden with an intensity that made him feel exposed, like Kingsley could see something in him that Jaden couldn't understand. You remind me of someone? Kingsley finally said, his voice low. Someone I knew a long time ago. Jaden's chest tightened. Oh? Who? Kingsley didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. You have a bright future here, Jaden, he said after a long pause. But you should know, this business, it's not always what it seems. You have to be careful who you trust. Jaden frowned, not sure how to respond. I understand, sir. Kingsley turned back to him, his eyes dark and unreadable. Do you? His voice was sharp, almost accusing. Be careful, Jaden. Not everything in life is what it appears to be. The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning Jaden couldn't quite grasp. Before he could ask more, Kingsley waved him off, his demeanor returning to its usual cold professionalism. You're dismissed. Keep up the good work. As Jaden left the office, his mind raced. What had that been about? Why had Kingsley been so cryptic? And why did Jaden feel like there was something more to this, something personal? That night, Jaden came home with a heavy heart. The conversation with Kingsley had left him rattled, more uncertain than ever. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him, his mother. He found Naomi in the living room, sitting on the couch with a book open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, her face softening with a mother's instinct. Jaden, what's wrong? Jaden didn't waste any time. Mom, we need to talk. Naomi's hands tightened on the book, her face suddenly guarded. About what? Jaden sat down across from her, his voice tense. About Kingsley Enterprises. About Michael Kingsley. I need to know the truth. Naomi's breath hitched, her face paling. She had known this moment would come, but she had prayed it wouldn't be so soon. She closed the book and set it aside, her hands trembling in her lap. Jaden, Naomi began, but her voice trailed off. She didn't know how to say the words, didn't know how to tell her son the truth she had kept buried for so long. Please, Mom, Jaden said, his voice soft but firm. I need to know. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, her heart breaking for what she was about to reveal. She had never wanted Jaden to know the pain, the betrayal, but now there was no other choice. Michael Kingsley, Naomi whispered, her voice trembling. He's your father. Jaden froze. The room seemed to tilt around him, his mind struggling to process what his mother had just said. What? That can't be. What are you talking about? Naomi's tears flowed freely now, her voice choked with emotion. It's true, Jaden. Michael and I, we had an affair before you were born. When I told him I was pregnant, he fired me. He ruined my career, my life. He didn't want anything to do with me or you. Jaden's world shattered. Everything he had believed about his life, about his father, was a lie. Michael Kingsley wasn't just his boss. He was the man who had abandoned his mother, who had destroyed her life. And now, without knowing it, Jaden had been working for him, admiring him, seeking his approval. How could you not tell me? Jaden whispered, his voice filled with betrayal. Naomi sobbed, her heart breaking for her son. I wanted to protect you, Jaden. I didn't want you to grow up with that kind of pain. I didn't want you to know what kind of man he was. Jaden stood up, his fists clenched, anger coursing through him. I've been working for him. I've been looking up to him. And all this time. I'm so sorry, Jaden, Naomi cried. I'm so sorry. Jaden didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the rage and hurt that were tearing through him. All he knew was that he couldn't let Michael Kingsley get away with what he had done. Jaden didn't sleep that night. His mind raced, replaying every interaction he'd had with Michael Kingsley, every conversation, every look. How had he not seen it? How had he not known? The next day, Jaden marched into Kingsley Enterprises, his heart pounding with a mix of fury and determination. He couldn't work there any longer, not under the shadow of the man who had destroyed his mother's life. But before he left, he needed answers. He needed Michael to acknowledge what he had done. Jaden didn't bother with an appointment. He stormed straight into Michael Kingsley's office. Ignoring the shocked look from the receptionist, Kingsley looked up from his desk, surprised to see Jaden standing there, anger radiating from him. Jaden, Kingsley began, his voice calm but cautious. What's the meaning of this? Jaden's chest heaved with emotion. You know who I am, don't you? Kingsley's eyes narrowed, his face betraying no emotion. You're a promising young analyst at my firm. That's all I need to know. Jaden's voice trembled with rage. You're my father. The words hung in the air, and for the first time Michael Kingsley looked shaken. His face paled, and his grip on the desk tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Jaden said, stepping closer, his voice rising. You had an affair with my mother. You got her pregnant, and then you fired her. You blacklisted her. You ruined her life, and you never looked back. Kingsley's face hardened, his eyes flashing with anger. This isn't the time or place for this. I don't care, Jaden shot back. You destroyed everything for her, and now you think you can just live your life, running this company like nothing happened? I'm not going to let you get away with it. Kingsley stood up, his voice cold and commanding. You need to leave. Jaden's hands shook with fury. I'm not leaving until you admit what you did. Kingsley's jaw tightened, his face filled with the weight of his past mistakes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Kingsley's voice dropped, barely a whisper. It was a long time ago. Jaden's heart twisted. You abandoned us. I didn't have a choice, Kingsley said, his voice rough. I had a family. I had a reputation to protect. Jaden stared at him, disgusted. That's your excuse? You left my mother with nothing. You didn't even care. Kingsley's face crumpled with guilt, but he didn't say anything. The truth was too heavy, too ugly to justify. I'm done here, Jaden said, his voice cold. You're not my father. You're just a coward. And with that, Jaden turned and walked out of the office, leaving Michael Kingsley to face the consequences of the life he had tried to bury. Jaden walked out of Kingsley Enterprises with a sense of finality. The confrontation with Michael had left him raw, emotionally drained. He had spent so many years unknowingly living under the shadow of the man who had betrayed his mother, and now he had finally exposed the truth. But instead of feeling triumphant, Jaden felt hollow. The rage and hurt that had fueled his actions were beginning to dissipate, leaving behind a deep ache. He hadn't told Naomi what he planned to do, and as he walked home, he felt a surge of guilt. She had protected him all these years, trying to shield him from the ugly truth. He understood now why she had kept it a secret. It wasn't just about the pain of the betrayal. It was about keeping Jaden from carrying the weight of it. When he entered the apartment that evening, Naomi was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. She looked up when she heard the door open, her face softening with relief when she saw him. "Jaden, you're home," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with worry. She had sensed his anger the night before and had been bracing herself for what might come next. Jaden walked over to the kitchen table, dropping his bag on the floor. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time in days, he let himself breathe deeply. "I confronted him, Mom." Naomi's hand froze on the spoon. Her face paled as she turned to face her son. "You did," Jaden nodded, his voice low. "I couldn't stay silent anymore. I told him everything. Who I am, who you are. I couldn't let him keep living like he had never hurt us." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, her heart aching for her son. She had never wanted him to carry the burden of her past, but now that it had all come to light, she knew there was no turning back. She walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What did he say?" she asked softly. Jaden shook his head, his jaw tight. He didn't deny it. He tried to justify it, said he had a reputation to protect, a family. But it's all excuses. He didn't care about us. Not then, not now. Naomi's tears fell freely now, her hand tightening on Jaden's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Jaden. I didn't want you to go through this." Jaden looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and understanding. "It's not your fault, Mom. You did what you had to do. You protected me." Naomi's voice trembled as she spoke. "I thought if I could just keep it buried, if I could move on, we could have a life without him. I didn't want you to grow up hating him, or worse, feeling like you were unwanted." Jaden stood up, wrapping his arms around his mother. "I could never hate you for that. You did what was best for me. You've always done what's best for me." They stood there for a long time, holding each other, their hearts heavy but finally open to healing. For the first time in years, the weight of the past began to lift. Jaden had confronted the man who had caused them so much pain, but in the end, it was Naomi's strength and love that had kept them both standing. The days following Jaden's confrontation with Michael were difficult. News of the confrontation had spread through the office, and soon it reached the ears of the board of directors at Kingsley Enterprises. Rumors began circulating that Michael Kingsley's position as CEO was in jeopardy. Jaden tried to distance himself from the gossip, but it was impossible to ignore the growing tension within the company. One afternoon, Jaden received a company-wide email announcing that Michael Kingsley had officially stepped down as CEO. The message was short and vague, but everyone knew the truth. The pressure had finally caught up with him. His empire was crumbling. Jaden stared at the email, feeling a mix of emotions. He had wanted justice, and in a way, he had gotten it. Michael had lost his power, his control over the company that had defined his life. But the victory felt hollow. Jaden had expected that bringing Michael down would give him closure, but instead it left him feeling empty. Later that evening, Jaden sat with Naomi in their living room, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the space. Naomi had been quiet since hearing the news about Michael's resignation, her emotions conflicted. Part of her felt vindicated, but another part of her was deeply saddened by the years of pain they had both endured because of him. "What are you going to do now?" Naomi asked quietly, breaking the silence. Jaden leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know, Mom. Staying at Kingsley Enterprises doesn't feel right anymore. I can't keep working for the company that he built, not after everything." Naomi nodded, understanding. "It's your choice, Jaden. But whatever you decide, know that you're free now. Free from him, free from the past. You can build a future that's yours." Jaden looked at her, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in weeks. She was right. The past had held them both captive for too long. Now it was time to move forward. In the weeks that followed, Jaden made the decision to leave Kingsley Enterprises. He handed in his resignation, and while some of his colleagues were surprised, many understood. The company had become a symbol of the complicated, painful past that Jaden could no longer be part of. With his mother's support, Jaden began to plan his next steps. He wanted to start something new, something that reflected the values Naomi had instilled in him: integrity, hard work, and compassion. He decided to open his own financial consulting firm, focusing on helping small businesses and entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. He wanted to give back, to use his skills to create opportunities for others, just as his mother had always hoped for him. Naomi, now free from the burden of her past, began to focus on herself for the first time in years. She took up hobbies she had long neglected, started volunteering at a local community center, and even began taking classes at a nearby college. The years of hardship had taken their toll, but Naomi's spirit was unbreakable. And now, with Jaden by her side, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Years passed, and Jaden's business flourished. He built a reputation not just for his financial expertise, but for his integrity and dedication to helping others. His firm grew, and he became a respected figure in the industry, but he never forgot the lessons his mother had taught him about resilience and staying true to one's values. Naomi, too, found a sense of peace and fulfillment in her later years. The pain of her past had not disappeared, but she had learned to move beyond it, to focus on the life she had built with her son and the future they now shared. Jaden's personal life also took a turn for the better. He met a woman, Alyssa, who shared his passion for helping others, and they quickly fell in love. Together, they built a life filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. Alyssa admired Jaden's strength and the way he had overcome the challenges of his past. Soon they married, and Jaden became a father himself, vowing to never repeat the mistakes of the man who had once abandoned him. As the years went on, Jaden and Naomi remained close, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced the shadows of their past together, and now they stood in the light, free from the pain that had once held them back. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Jaden sat on the porch of his new home, watching his young son play in the yard. Naomi sat beside him, smiling as she watched her grandson laugh and run through the grass. "We made it, didn't we?" Naomi said softly, her voice filled with pride. Jaden nodded, his heart full. "Mom, we did." The past had been painful, but in the end, they had survived. They had built something beautiful out of the broken pieces, and now they were free to live the life they had always deserved. If you enjoyed this story and found it as thrilling and captivating as I did, please consider hitting that subscribe button to stay updated with more incredible tales like this one. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on any new stories, and you'll be the first to experience the twists and turns of every adventure. Don't forget to turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you're always in the loop when new content drops. Your support truly helps this channel grow and allows me to continue creating stories that inspire, entertain, and connect us all. Thanks for being a part of this journey. Join our community and let's continue exploring together.